When I was 25 and a half, I started a podcast. The goal? To review some of the newest and the latest movies, along with some other stuff. With the help of my guests, I was able to do this, but there were dark forces tampering with my podcast, and with me. They called it an improvised podcast for some reason. I eventually found help in the form of myself. Yes, the me from a universe where the movies I reviewed got delayed. Apparently, my podcast made it to his universe. I know now that it is my duty, for the good of that universe, nay, the multiverse, to keep recapping and reviewing these movies, to hold listeners over until they could eventually see the movies as they were made in their world. For some reason, they come out differently in my world, but it's kind of entertaining that way. My name is Steven Shinder, and this is Delayed Replay. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Delayed Replay, that podcast where we recap and review movies that came out on time in our universe but got delayed in that other universe. I'm your host, as always, Steven Shinder, and joining me to talk about this new Dungeons and Dragons movie that came out recently for us, like November 19th, but in that other universe, I guess it's delayed to 2023. So yeah, we're here to hold you over, I guess. Joining me once again, you may have heard her on the previous episode of this podcast. It is Hayley. How's it going?
Hello, how's it going, Steven? It's good for me. I don't know how to respond to things properly, apparently.
Oh yeah, no, when people ask me how's it going, I don't know right away like how to answer, so it's kind of ironic that I asked that knowing exactly
Yeah,
how.
it's very much like you're at a restaurant, they say the server says, "Oh, and like enjoy your food," and then you accidentally say, "Oh, you too," and then oh, oops.
Or like they'll keep coming back to the table and being like, is everything here good? And we're like, yes, it's
Yeah.
leave me alone, I'm eating.
Yeah, my answer has not changed since 5 minutes ago. Thank you.
Right. We're talking about this new Dungeons and Dragons movie, but first, very briefly, I guess we'll go into like our previous experiences with D&D. So like how did you get into D&D and how's that sort of influenced parts of your life?
Well, yeah, I've been like a huge D&D nerd since I've been playing D&D since I was like 15. My dad had all like the original books, like the first edition, so we played that. My first character was like a wood elf, and she was a multi-class of like a mage, a rogue, and a fighter, I think. Like you could just do that in the like right off the bat, like a three class multi-class. It was insane. But yeah, I started playing when I was 15, and then had my first kind of like I got to play in an actual campaign my last year of high school, and we actually played like fifth edition, which is like the newest one, which is a much better system than the first edition by far. And yeah, and then since then I've just been like I've ran my own campaigns. I'm actually currently running a campaign now with like my own like homebrew world and everything. But yeah, I love D&D. It's just like it's very very important to me. Especially love Critical Role. Big fan of that show. But yeah, it's just a fun game, and I just like it's just really fun to kind of create your own characters and kind of play with the rules and kind of just do whatever, it's really up to your imagination. That's what I really like about it.
Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons is something I was somewhat aware of for a while before I got into it. It wasn't until I was like 16 that my friend Albert, who's been on this show before on the Wonder Woman 1984 episode, he introduced me and another friend and eventually my brother and a few other friends to the game. And like, playing it, doing an encounter, it was like, whoa, this is fun. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, you create characters and you go on adventures, you get to sneak around, you get to roll to see if like your lies or trickery in like these conversations to get some information end up working out. Like I think my first character was a bard gnome,
Mm.
and later I had like a couple like shifter druid characters. At one point, an Eladrin wizard whose name was Mendartis, Shindartis, the mind artist.
Amazing.
Yes. And I think also a halfling rogue at one point.
Hmm.
So yeah, like I played with my brother and our friends for a while, but we would play a whole campaign with one set of characters, and then the next person would DM, and we'd switch to another different set of characters,
Hmm.
and sort of go in that cycle.
I mean, that's really the best way. I've been kind of stuck as like a forever DM for a long time. Not that I don't mind, I like DMing, but like I do have a lot of characters that I've created. I actually have like an Excel sheet, and I think there's like 40 or 50 current characters that I have. I have a lot. Yeah. Now that I say that out loud, kind of I don't know if that should be concerning or not, but yeah, I have a lot, and I've only got to play like a small handful of them because I only really kind of DM. Occasionally I'll play in a one shot. I practically like leap at the chance. I'm like, yes, I'll play. I'll be a player for once. Let me play. But yeah, I don't mind DMing either. It's because it's fun to kind of create a story and also do like the DM smirk behind the screen when players ask like, oh, like what do you think about this? And you just kind of shrug and be like, well, I don't know. Why don't you find out? Around, find out and see what happens.
Yeah, like I've DM'd a couple times, like a couple different campaigns, and what I found was that I would love reading up on different types of creatures and settings, but my execution wasn't that great. Like I would open up more threads than I knew how to close. And just in general, like it got to a point where like even just as a player, like I would kind of not enjoy it as much because certain games would take too long. There would be long debates of what to do next or how to do something, or I would forget how my powers work or the math behind it. And so it got to a point where like in 2013, I want to say, like between high school and college, I decided to like take a break from it all and focus on other things. But then when I started going to college, like freshman year, there was this RPG club, and I decided to join a campaign that someone was running, and I realized once again, oh, I kind of suck at this. I kind of hope that I can get out of this somehow. But like the group ended up fizzling out as like people got busy and we were like dropping off and whatnot. So but I do enjoy like the overall idea of Dungeons and Dragons. It's very much like obviously it derives stuff from Lord of the Rings, like Tolkien and stuff. Well, like you were talking about before we started this recording. But like I feel like it's also influenced stuff like Warcraft and Elder Scrolls.
Yeah, it's kind of, I feel like D&D is kind of like a prerequisite to a lot of like modern video games especially in terms of like classes, and like different classes that you can pick, especially like with like the cleric and like the fighter, the wizard, just like your kind of very standard like basic classes. So I definitely feel like D&D kind of because before there were video games, there was maybe they were I'm trying to think of a timeline because D&D came out in like the 80s. I'm pretty sure
74.
74, close enough.
And then like Elder Scrolls and Warcraft both came out in 94. Weirdly.
Yeah. So yeah, there was some time before like some of these video games, because like the first video games were just like Pac-Man and stuff like that. So you couldn't really choose a class for Pac-Man.
Yeah, just eating ghosts.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think that like yeah, D&D has had a big influence on like video games that came after it. But yeah, in general, like you could see a lot of like influence from like Tolkien and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny that like there are all these like, well, I should say like I think there's in total like I guess 4 now like D&D movies, like specifically D&D. But it's just kind of funny to me because like when you think about it in retrospect, like technically Lord of the Rings is like a D&D movie. Like that's it's like it's literally like a campaign that you would play potentially. I like to think of Dungeons and Dragons as being like kind of 2 ends of the spectrum. Either you have like your Lord of the Rings campaign, or you have Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And it could go either way. It could start serious and go like very comedy kind of central very fast, or it could be start being comedy and then go serious very fast. I've heard stories of people making like kind of joke characters like Bob Buttface or something, and then all of a sudden he becomes like a very tragic character as like the campaign gets like more and more serious. Of course, there's always like a medium. Sometimes it fluctuates, you know, it's not always serious, not always funny, but I like to kind of think of that as like the two kind of references when you think about like, well, what could a D&D campaign be? You're like, here are these two examples.
Yeah, like I know I've said that there were times when I wasn't having as great of a time, but when there were fun times, like the most fun times were probably when like me and the other players are just around, like just joking. And I feel like D&D is also very flexible in terms of aesthetic, because
Yes.
you know, we expect Lord of the Rings to be a certain way, but with D&D you could sort of adapt to more of a like Victorian Gothic type of setting, or like something that's maybe, I don't know, maybe
Yeah,
something
more
that's
like
like kind of
sci-fi, you know, you could do.
Western with
Yeah.
medieval elements.
Yeah, and it
Like
doesn't even
it's very
have to be
flexible.
medieval, you know, because, you know, really D&D is just it's just kind of a guideline, right? You know, like
Yeah.
the rules and everything, they're mostly just a guideline, but you can set like a setting as like, you know, whatever you want. Like in the homebrew world that I have, I actually have a like a nation that is more kind of steampunk based, you know. No, I didn't lean too heavily into it because I overall I like more fantasy elements over like sci-fi. But and I also had like a Western area because I had a player who was like, is there like a Western area? And I was like, well, now there is. I just added it into the world, you know. But yeah, I mean that's the beauty of it, right? You can just kind of do whatever.
Yeah. And of course, there have been, like you mentioned earlier, there have been adaptations over the years. I checked out a tiny bit of the 80s cartoon like many years ago, and it was kind of corny and cheesy. Like, you know, the
Yeah.
kids go to a carnival, end up in the D&D world somehow.
Yeah.
In terms of the live action movies,
Hmm.
I know for sure I've seen the first one, which came out in 2000, and it was not good. It had
Yeah. Not
like
surprised.
yeah, what the Wayans is was in a stereotypical comedic role that just didn't work. And
Hmm.
like I don't remember if I watched the second movie in full. I might have seen bits of it on the Sci-Fi Channel or something. Don't know if I've watched the third one, but the sequels don't look very good. So it's like I've never devoted time to watching them.
Yeah. Understandable.
Yeah. Have you seen any of those?
No.
Okay, good.
No. I didn't want to subject myself to cringe. I don't hate myself that much.
Yeah, like for this podcast, there are lots of movies I wouldn't have watched if I didn't feel like I needed to watch them to prepare for like certain topics. Like I watched like all the Resident Evil movies for this podcast, and
Oh,
it
I'm
was,
sorry.
yeah, yeah, it was torture.
Yeah.
But this time around, I was like, you know what? I don't have time to watch the older D&D movies. I'm just watching this new one, and well, yeah.
Yeah, just call it a day.
This is a different continuity from the other films,
Hmm.
thankfully. So
Yeah, it is completely separate, so that's good at least.
yeah. And it begins like it kind of hits the ground running, or at least tries to, by like showing all these adventurers like on a quest. Like they're running through a forest and fighting through some orcs, and they get to a castle, and it's like super action packed. But,
Hmm.
but but then it like zooms out and shows like some like teens like playing the game on the mat. Like
Hmm.
how this opening make you feel?
It was definitely like the opening part with them like running in gave me very much kind of like it made it feel kind of like a Marvel movie and like not in a good way.
Oh, like the beginning of Age of Ultron.
Yeah, something like that where they're like, I don't know, it was just very corny, but I did like how they kind of panned out and like showed, you know, there were kids that were playing this game. And I guess it would make sense from their perspective for it to be like very like bombastic and just kind of you know, very kind of cliched action in general. So I guess from like in that perspective it makes sense, but like I don't know. I don't really watch any Marvel movies anymore. I haven't seen a Marvel movie in like years because I just don't like them. I just think they're boring, you know, like it's just the same thing with different, just, you know, put a different layer of paint over it and give it a new title.
Now people are gonna come after you with pitchforks for
Hey,
that opinion.
you can come after me all you want. I'm not, you can't change my mind.
Yeah.
Marvel movies are bad, change my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that they recycle a lot, but I also still enjoy them somehow. So I guess I'm part of the problem. But
Yeah.
I totally get where you're coming from.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, like if people enjoy them, like that's totally fine too. Like it's just like, you know, some people like to watch, you know, like it's sometimes like having a familiar kind of narrative is comforting, you know. You're like, okay, well, I know that this person's
Yeah.
probably gonna be okay and everything. I just personally I'm like, I don't know. Why would I want to watch the same film in different paint over and over again?
Someone on Discord, within these last couple months said
Mhm.
something along the lines of, I hate those Twitter bios where people say I like movies, but like all they watch is like superhero movies. Like, bro,
Yeah.
you don't know what a movie could be.
You got to expand your horizons.
Yeah, this opening also kind of reminded me of like how Toy Story 3 began, you know, showing like the fictional world that the toys are in,
Hmm.
or I guess it's also how Toy Story 2 began with like the Buzz Lightyear video game, then zooming out.
Yeah.
So I thought this was kind of fun, but yeah, we get like these teenagers who are like are arguing over like what to do next, and they're
Hmm.
each going through their own like problems. Like,
Because they were still like, you know, like the DM is describing like the combat scenario, right? So they're figuring out like trying to, because you know, when you first, especially when you're like a kid, you know, and you do combat in D&D, you kind of feel like, okay, I want to do like the coolest thing that my character can do, right? Like
yeah,
what can deal the most damage? And it's like, especially like as I've played over the years, you've kind of and watching Critical Role too, you kind of understand that like, okay, well, if you're playing a support class, it's probably for a reason, you know, like you can help buff your teammates and that actually can do help like way more in the long run. So the conflict of them kind of going over and being like, you know, the like I think it was like the cleric, whoever was playing the cleric, was like, oh, I want to use like, you know, one of their more like, you know, harmful spells that they could use to deal damage. One of the other players' characters was like critically injured. Like it's like, you know, they want to do the cool thing, but everyone else is like, hey, can you like please heal this character? They're gonna like literally die. You know, we don't want any death saving throws on the table. And they're like, no, I want to do like the cool thing or whatever. Which I honestly that was like, you know, very accurate. And unfortunately, even though there are like it was mostly kids that do that, you know, I have played with people that are also just like that in general, that are adults, and I'm like, can you maybe like not do that? So I felt like at least that was like pretty realistic, and I was just like, oof, okay, well, ouch.
yeah. And Chloe Coleman plays like the little sister who wants to play the game, but
Hmm.
it's like they don't let her because they say that it's complicated to like teach the rules, and
Yeah.
like, yeah, like it was kind of like I kind of got annoyed with these kids, how they were like telling her that in a condescending way
They were
as a,
gatekeeping her.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I like that was like one of the running plot threads throughout this movie. Like they would cut between like these teens and the fictional world that they'd be playing, and like it kind of felt to
Hmm.
me like a mix between like what the Princess Bride and Neverending Story and I guess Jumanji kind of do.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Let's talk about their characters.
Hmm.
So who was it that was a cleric? Like which actor was that?
I think that was I'm trying to think. Was it was probably Chris Pine, I think.
Oh yeah, like he was a cleric and an elf, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like a like a poor man's Legolas. No offense, Chris Pine.
Yeah, like his name was it was something like a Megablo, and it's such a weird name, but it makes me think of Mega Blocks. So
Oh yeah.
yeah,
My first thought
so
was
like,
Mega Minds,
oh
but
yeah, but like, you know, because Lego is in Legolas's name, it's pretty funny that like his name is that, and he feels
Yeah.
like a discount Lego
The
lass.
knockoff Legos and knockoff Lego Lass. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not a very good name. Like it sounds like gobbledygook, I
Yeah.
guess.
I mean, to be fair, I guess these are like the kids that named their characters. So like,
Yeah,
you
true.
know, when you first start playing it, it's definitely easier to make like silly names or gravitate towards like super edgy, like, like Dark Thrift the Destroyer or something like that. Like something like really like, okay, wow, you need to maybe take a step back there, buddy.
Yeah, and you also have like some not so creative names that are kind of on the nose. Like Michelle Rodriguez's character is a shard mind named Crystal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean it's easy to remember, but it's also like, come on, you could have come up with something else for
I
her.
know that hurts me in particular because usually like sometimes like a character name will come like very easily to me, but like most of the time I have like a list of like 30 names and it's like agonizing to like pick one. I'm like, oh, but this one, I'm like, oh no, and I have to like cross them off like tediously as I try to narrow them down. And then I ask my friends, I'm like, which one sounds better? Which one do you like more? So it is kind of funny. I'm like, oh wow, wish it could be that easy.
I mean, Justice Smith's character had sort of a cool name, didn't he?
I think I liked his the best. It was like, what was it? It was like Varys or something.
Yeah, it was Varys. Yeah, and his character, like he plays, it was like a dwarf.
Yeah, I think it was a dwarf barbarian, but
Okay.
but yeah, some sort of like melee class for sure.
Yeah, and we also had I don't know how this person's name is pronounced.
Neither do I. I've literally never heard of them.
Yeah, okay, I'm looking up the pronunciation of his name. Okay, it's Regé-Jean Page, or maybe it's Jean Page, but yeah. So he plays like a ranger.
The ranger. I think they fixed it in 5e, but for a while it was like the most hated class. Everyone, if anyone wanted to shit on a class, they'd just go to ranger. They'd be like, oh yeah, the ranger sucks.
Reggae's character is a Kalashtar ranger
Mhm.
whose name is, what was his name again?
I forgot his name. Probably because he was the ranger. I think it was like it was something basic. I think it was like Edward or something.
Yeah, it
Um,
was.
I mean, I guess they are still kids playing this right now, so like, kind of coming up with stuff. But I guess they're like, I guess they're kind of like humans in terms of like their physical makeup, but like, they are kind of like from what I've read. I have made a couple, but I've never actually got to play any of them. But they're kind of like there was a whole like psionics kind of edition in like the UA and then eventually in Tosh's they released it. So they were kind of part of that where they were more in tune with like psionic powers and kind of like dreams and whatnot. So they're pretty cool.
Yeah, and like Sophia Lillis, his character is named Doric.
She was a rogue, I believe, right?
Yeah, she was a rogue, and which is funny because like she seems kind of roguish in a
Mm-hmm.
way. Yeah, I don't know if you like see this, but I often see people like misspelling rogue as rouge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's something that started around the time of Rogue One or what, but it's just kind of annoying to me.
Mhm. They're like, hey, can you fix that? And I believe wasn't she like a tiefling, I think?
Yeah, she was like
Yeah.
she had the horns.
Yeah, tieflings are my favorite race. I have so many of them. I love them.
Yeah, and Jason Wong plays Dralis, who is in, I think he was in Eladrin, right? I can't remember what his class
Oh, and
was.
Eladrin, yeah, they're cool. I love like the Fey creatures and whatnot. I think he was a druid.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And Daisy Head was,
I think she was a changeling, right? But I'm trying to remember the class. Oh, a wizard. She was a wizard. Gotta have a wizard in the party.
yeah, and her name was Rosebud. I don't know if that's like a Citizen Kane reference or what, but
Mm,
yeah. And of course the villain of this movie is this guy that Hugh Grant plays named Forge Fletcher.
yeah.
Yeah. He has this army of warforged
Hmm.
people, like, warforged, they're kind of like the robots within D&D.
Yeah, I actually in my current campaign I have someone who's playing a warforged.
Yeah, like Forge Fletcher is, out of this main cast, he's like the only human,
Yeah.
which I guess is kind of fitting because humanity is sometimes pretty evil.
And also kind of fitting that like he's the human and he's the one who's making all like the robots, you know? I don't know. It's just kind of like a standard thing that I think about, like, oh yes, of course the human is going to make something for the, you know, destruction.
Yeah.
But no, humans are fun to play too. I have quite a few humans.
Yeah, and they do this thing where they provide a flashback that shows like how these characters met each other. And it was pretty much like they were each hanging out at this bar and ended up in a bar fight, and that's how they ended up sort of becoming this like fellowship and like this camaraderie with each other, which I thought was kind of weird but also kind of funny.
Yeah, it's very like standard, like, oh, you meet in a tavern type of deal, which is like, you know, definitely like the easiest setting to kind of ease all the characters together. But yeah, they had like their bar fight, and then I think there was like someone who was kind of like watching them like work together and hired them to do like a bounty. So that also kind of further like the bond that they were kind of forming, and kind of really gave like a reason for the characters to kind of come together. Which, you know, is obviously very smart. You want like a reason for your characters to be together, otherwise they could have just, you know, done the bar thing and then just gone their separate ways. So they definitely needed some sort of like tying, or like some sort of a catalyst to kind of tie them together.
Yeah, and this person who was watching them, like, it's kind of funny because there's a moment where his voice sounds exactly like the DM's voice. Um, so like that was like kind of unsettling, but also kind of funny, I guess. But yeah, they accept this bounty and like have to go and hunt this person who's been like supposedly stirring a lot of trouble. And this is a Rakshasa character that they're after, who's like, there's been word of like murders and stuff, so like they're after this person.
Yeah, and I think at this point, like the characters now are like at a like a decent level, you know, like they're still not very like high level, but like not like super low, like level 5. I think they were like level 7 or something. Sashas are like definitely a little harder to fight. So unless the DM, you know, like nerfed it real hard, but like yeah.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the players decided to start at level 7 rather than level 1 because they're just
Yeah.
impatient.
But I mean, you know, what do I know? Maybe like the people in Hollywood don't know like the actual, like they don't look up the challenge rating on each monster and just kind of throw whatever, which is like, I guess is fine. But you know, there's also me sitting there going like, well, technically.
Yeah, like they didn't read the players' handbooks.
Exactly. You have to have it memorized front and back. Come on, guys.
All the monster manuals of every edition, not just
Yeah.
the current one. Like they hike up these mountains and end up in this tundra, and they have to like camp out within this igloo, and it sort of makes for like a little bonding moment for them. And they sort of argue over like the food that they've rationed, and like as all this is going on, it's kind of weird to me because I'm wondering, are the players just arguing about all this and like prolonging the time that
Yeah.
they could be using like getting to this encounter?
I mean, it could happen. Like, no joke. I was in like a campaign that I actually just I left after the first session because I didn't like it. But the DM was like dead set on having the first session last 3 hours exactly. So we ended up role playing
wow.
like 45 minutes of going to bed, and I wanted to die. It was awful. You know, no D&D is better than bad D&D.
Yeah, and they go to sleep in this igloo, and that's when like the DM puts them through this like psychological encounter where they're battling these dark forces within a dream space. And like I was not expecting them to try this, but like what'd you think of how they handled this scene?
I mean, I liked all like the effects they used and everything. You know, when they were battling these like dark forces, you could hear them, like the dark forces kind of like echo back in their own voices. So implying that, you know, even though they couldn't see them, maybe these were like, you know, their own inner demons, or like, you know, kind of like a doppelganger type of thing. So that was pretty cool. I was like intriguing. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. You know, I kind of wanted to see where that led.
Yeah, and it felt like this scene was like their opportunity to throw in some really weird like D&D lore Easter eggs, I guess you could say. Like there were like some really creepy eldritch abominations
Mm-hmm.
and zombies and different demonic looking things. And like they didn't fight all of these. Like some of them are glimpses cuz like, you know, it would be a lot for them to fight at this level, I
Yeah.
guess. The effects worked kind of well here. Like there were times where the CGI looked not refined enough. Like it kind
Yeah,
of
I
looked
kind of
like,
faltered a bit.
yeah, like it kind of looked like 90s CGI at times, but at
Yeah.
this, I guess that kind of works if they want to make it look unsettling, you know?
Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like, if you should probably have your CGI at like one level of quality. Otherwise, it looks very like, disconcerting just in general. Like, because you have like unsettling CGI that's like good quality, but like, I don't know. It kind of gave me the ones that weren't as polished as the others kind of reminded me of the CGI from the live action Scooby-Doo movie. Kind of like bordering on there, and I was like, "Oh, it's not gonna age well." Are you sure that's a decision you want to make?
The monsters just look like buff Scrappy Doo.
No.
I guess the most unrealistic part of this movie was how quick this encounter was.
Yeah.
You know, because like encounters in actual D&D can take forever, like
Yeah. Well,
between
I
the
mean, I guess to
players.
be fair though, like from like an actual like if you were looking at like an in-game perspective, like each round is only supposed to take like 6 seconds, or each turn is supposed to take 6 seconds. So like, it makes sense from that point. But if they like panned out and showed all the kids playing, they would have been doing combat for like at least an hour, because you got to go through like everyone's turn, everyone's like bonus action, their movement, any other thing, their reaction. It just take combat just takes a long time in general. So yeah, that would be that. I kind of like wished. I mean, I guess it was like an intense scene, but like it kind of would have been funny to like pan out and then just show like one person describing what's going on and the other people just like waiting for their turn
Yeah.
or going back in, because that's kind of the reality, especially if you have a lot of people playing.
Yeah, and there is a later encounter where it's kind of done as like a montage where like you would see like a few seconds of the character moving and then someone rolling dice and then the next action and then the
Yeah, that
next
was
character.
cool.
Yeah, it kind of felt like those what people love to do in modern Sherlock Holmes media, I
Oh
guess.
yeah.
Like slow down, show the thing, do the thing, you know. I kind of like when they did that every once in a while.
Mhm.
As they continue through this tundra, like they finally find the Rakshasa they've been looking for.
Mhm.
And he has like his own like backup with him. So obviously it's not just them fighting him. It's like, you know, it's got to be a challenge, obviously.
Mhm.
It was kind of intense because the fight was on like thin ice and you would zoom out and it would show the players and they'd be like, whoa, 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 why would we be fighting on like a frozen lake? Like that makes no sense.
Yeah. It's cool though, I guess.
Oh, was that intentional? Like cool?
Oh, no, but I'm gonna pretend it was. So
Okay.
yes, it was definitely intentional. You didn't hear me say that other part just now.
And the DM was like, I am the dungeon master. Like
Yeah.
sort of like laying down the law, like abusing their power and whatnot.
Yeah, that's also a problem with like sometimes DMs, because you gotta make sure you're a team player. Sometimes they're too railroady. And I think it actually came to like a head later on, kind of like the climax where, the players were like, hey, you can't, like the DM was like, because some DMs like are mean and they'll like try to kill your character on purpose for like no other reason besides like they have power in that position, they can use it. So it kind of came to a head and they were like, hey, yo, stop being a dick. And then the DM's like, well, no, um but I mean, like spoilers, it was resolved, but that was like, I guess that was like another kind of realistic element they added in. But I guess that kind of happens in anything besides like D&D. If someone has like a position of power, they can easily abuse it.
Yeah, like as the film progresses, it becomes obvious that Forge Fletcher is the DM's avatar. You know, Forge is
Yeah.
able to create these warforged beings who just do his
Yeah, the
bidding.
DM self insert if you know.
Yeah, and I guess like the DM wishes to control the other players into doing what's expected, like based on like the outline that
Mhm.
what was pre-planned. Like I guess the DM doesn't like some of the spontaneity that the players try and kind
Mhm.
of gets annoyed by it, but it's like, I mean, that's kind of the lesson toward the end of this movie, is that the spontaneity is part of the fun of Dungeons and Dragons.
Mhm. Yeah, you can't have everything like just strictly in rules, That's not, I mean, you can be a rules lawyer if you want, but the point of the game is to have fun and let everyone experience a story and work together as a team. And if you try to show off individually or try to control other people, it just doesn't work because that's just not the fundamentals of the game. So yeah, I could definitely see that message that they were trying to put in the movie, which was like, yeah, that's appreciated.
Yeah, like being over controlling would remove the fun from fundamentals
Mm-hmm.
and would just be demental, I guess.
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yes, so they end up killing this Rakshasa guy, and then one of the players is like, "No, you idiot, we're supposed to bring him back alive." And like they just get in this argument to like flip the table and
Yeah.
and like the parents come in and they're like super upset that they're being like super loud about
Mm-hmm.
this. And the little sister like still wants to play, and it's just like this is really like I know what they were going for, but I know what they were going for. Like they're trying to do like a Princess Bride type of thing, but some of these interruptions in the narrative kind of annoyed me a bit the more often they did it.
Yeah, honestly, I've kind of got the vibe that they were trying to be like, they obviously took a lot of inspiration from The Princess Bride, right? I mean, we've already mentioned it a lot. It's like, oh, hey, doesn't this remind you of this? And you're like, oh, yeah, it does. And it just doesn't work. I mean, taking inspiration is one thing, but like trying to use the exact same model is another, and that honestly that kind of defeats the point of Dungeons and Dragons a little bit, right? Because you want to try to be, actually no, I shouldn't say that. A good DM always steals other stuff, so maybe not.
Yeah, there's an old saying that good artists borrow but great artists steal.
Yeah. Especially with from like obscure things like, oh yeah, my players won't recognize that. I'll just take that and just input in that into my story and wash my hands and no one will notice. But but if you're making like a movie, it's like a lot more obvious. Especially since you're trying to like monetize it and everything. So I think in that case it's a little less forgivable, right? It's one thing if you're running like a home game and it's like just for your friends and you're like, oh, this is like a cool thing I like and I want them to experience the cool thing too. But it's another if you're just kind of like you know trying to get audience in, be like, hey, remember this thing you liked, we also did the same thing except worse.
They bring the body back to the person who hired them, and they
Hmm.
get less money than they would have if they brought him alive.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
to be fair, catching a Rakshasa like alive was gonna be difficult anyways. So, but yeah, I guess sucks for them. They don't get as as much gold, but fair, I guess.
yeah, and that's when they hear word that like there's an army of Warforged like coming to like attack the city or whatever.
Hmm.
That's when we learn like Forge Fletcher's whole deal, and he's very like stereotypical mustache twirling villain type of
Yeah. Oh
person.
yeah, for sure.
And like you could tell the DM was having a lot of fun like acting out his dialogue and
Hmm.
trying Hugh Grant's accent, and it was just like so over the top ridiculous.
Hmm.
I think the battle sequence had some cool moments. They would like shoot arrows and like use magic and stuff. Like at one point they use like prestidigitation and like this like ghost looking hand thing that they used, and it was like I thought there were like some creative ways that they went by like the attacks. I just kind of wish that the Warforged army was more that they didn't all look so the same, like I would have loved some more variety from them.
Yeah, instead of just different badges, like they could have made like, whatever, like the general of like that army or that like little squad or whatever. I don't know how military terms work. But they could have made them, like different types of robots. So you have like your normal soldiers, and then like as they get higher up in the ranks, they look like more intimidating, but they just kind of went with like different colors and I think like a different helmet, and I was like, oh, that's cool, I guess.
I mean, it got to a point where the Warforged, the CGI for them reminded me too much of the Iron Man movies, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Well, now that you say that, oh man, we were talking about Marvel earlier too.
Yeah.
No.
But that being said, like I was still impressed with like the CGI for Crystal, the Shard Mind.
hmm
What class was she again? Like she was using like lots of like psychological attacks.
Oh, yeah. I don't think we ever said what her class was. I think she was like a sorcerer, and probably, I mean, they didn't never specified like the what like subclasses they use, but since she was using more kind of like psionic powers, I was assuming that maybe she was like an aberrant mind sorcerer, which is like one of the newer ones from Tasha's. But yeah, no, she had definitely lots of magic and stuff. So yeah, magic classes are more of my kind of jam. So that was cool to see.
Yeah, like some of the powers that they used were really colorful, I guess you could say.
hmm
Like you had people in the city running around and like the characters argue about whether they should like retreat and try to like regroup or whatever, but
hmm
someone else is like, no, we have to keep fighting and protect these people. And it's like, dude, we're gonna die and we're gonna have to create new characters if that happens. It's just
Yeah.
like stuff like that kind of leans on the fourth wall, I
hmm
guess.
Yeah.
They're eventually captured and taken to Forge Fletcher himself in his fortress, a kind of a prison because there are lots of cells and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like sitting in his chair wearing a crown as if he's like a king or something. That's something I was never clear on, is like whether he's an actual king or if he just likes to act like one.
Yeah, the castle is actually like an Airbnb. He just rented it out for the weekend for his evil plans.
Oh man, D&D Airbnb.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like taunting them and saying, "Hi, you failed," and pretty much like throws them in their cells. And
hmm
like the characters slash players are feeling pretty down about this, and they kind of want to rage quit. But then one of them is like, "Well, wait, we wouldn't be put in here if there wasn't a way out, right?"
So wasn't that Chris Pine's character who kind of gave them the standard kind of cleric pep talk? I guess he was kind of more of the
Yeah,
like the optimistic one of the group.
yeah,
Um,
Megablo
yeah,
was
that fucking name.
trying to boost the morale.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny just seeing like Chris Pine just be like, "Come on, guys, we can do it." Like, I don't know, it was just kind of funny, but
Well,
yeah,
like Bob the Buildering this thing.
yeah. But yeah, like yeah, Maleg Blow, whatever, yeah, his name. um, but yeah, he like encourages the group, and they eventually start to problem solve. And I think it was actually Sophia Willis's character, Doric, the rogue, the tiefling rogue from earlier. She kind of improvises some other tools as like lock picks, and lock picks the door and gets out. So I was like, yeah, that's a useful way of showing that she's also a rogue.
Yeah, and she's rolling some really good stealth checks during
hmm
this. And they do the classic thing, like the old trope of stealing armor from the guards and masquerading as them.
Yeah.
Like just
And the armor doesn't fit like all of them perfectly. Like I think in for Justice's character Varus.
Yeah, because Varys is a dwarf, but like
hmm
the armor is a different size and it just like stands out.
Yeah.
So they try to infiltrate this prison and try to get to Forge Fletcher as soon as possible. But along the way, like they're spotted and they're like imposters, and they have to like do a whole nother encounter.
hmm
Thankfully, there's like they find these weapons that have some poison on the tips, and so they're able to like use these to their advantage. So like that was kind of convenient,
Hmm.
but like I don't know, how'd you feel about this development?
Technically anything can happen like a D&D campaign, right? But like yeah, from just like a plot perspective and like a general movie perspective, I was like, yeah, kind of on the same line of thinking as you. Like that's a little too convenient. Like, I wish they could have shown instead maybe Jason Wong's character Drawless, maybe because he's a druid, right? So like
Yeah.
he would know things about like plants and stuff, or maybe he knew things about like poisonous plants or different poisons. And I wish they found, instead of like just finding like a poison tip blade, they found like a small laboratory, and like they like maybe a couple of them worked together to create the poison. I think that would have been, that would have given an opportunity for more like character bonding, and also just like for the sake of it just like not being convenient, it would show them like using like skills outside of skills like for their class, like outside of fighting.
Yeah, definitely. And some of these adversaries that they're fighting are three crane guards. So they look like giant bugs basically.
Hmm.
But once they defeat them, they get to Forge Fletcher, like the final boss
Yeah.
himself. And like this was kind of an intense encounter, but I also feel like it dragged on for like way too long.
Yeah, especially the part where Daisy's character, the Rosebud, the changeling wizard, like she's a wizard, so she's pretty squishy. So, she fell in battle, and then like she was like revived, it was fine, but they definitely dragged it out like a lot. It was just like she's not like dead. You can just easily, you have a cleric, you can revive her, like chill out.
And again, like we mentioned, like they have like this arc for like the DM learning this lesson that it's all about fun, not about
Yeah.
killing the players type of thing.
Hmm.
At the end of this adventure, it's kind of like a moral of the day sort of thing, but which is nice. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like maybe the whole thing could have been executed better. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, just in general.
So like they end up defeating Forge Fletcher and having like a down to earth talk with the DM.
Hmm.
And
And it kind of cuts in and out, with like the players talking to the DM, and then the characters talking to Ford Fletcher. So that was, kind of like the half and half they've been doing, which is like, kind of cool. And then you can kind of see like both of these characters kind of make a realization kind of at the same moment.
yeah, and so once all that is resolved, it has this kind of nice ending, or at least trying to be nice, where like the little sister asks if she can play, and they all look at each other and they nod and they're like sure, and like it shows her like rolling a d20, and then it's like end credits, and like
Hmm.
on each side of the d20 you would see a different name of like an actor who is in the movie type of thing.
Yeah, that was cool. That was cool editing for sure. But yeah, that was kind of I think after all the credits rolled, there was, I don't know if you saw, but there was like an end credits scene
Oh yeah,
where,
there was.
yeah, where it showed that like a year later or so, and it was like all the friends. It was like one of the other friends became the new DM, and then like the sister was like actively joining it as well, and they were all like just having fun, kind of like a small slice of life after credit scene. So I was like, that was kind of nice. You kind of see like a mini epilogue of like what happened after all that.
So I guess that was kind of nice. I don't know if they intend to make another movie or what, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, honestly, I hope not.
Well, okay, so I guess since we're almost out of time, we can go for final thoughts and scores. So, what are your final thoughts, score out of 10, and do you have measurement for that score for Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah, I'd probably say out of a 1 to 10 like a 1 to 10 D10 scale, probably like a 5. Just because like the movie itself I guess was fine, but like I don't know. I just don't think that the concept of like a D&D movie appeals to me personally. I only saw it because I was like, well, I might as well, and just kind of see. But it just felt very like generic, and just kind of like they tried to use like the whole like D&D name too much, because like I was saying this before we started recording, but like Dungeons and Dragons is not about like the like yes, like it like part of it is like, about like the races and the classes and like the monsters and everything, but it's more of like a guideline and just kind of like a game that you can play, I just I don't know. And then like it's just kind of like it's definitely a lot more popular than it was a couple years ago, and especially when it first came out, and people were like, "Oh, that devil worshippers game." You're like, "Yep, that's what it was." But like, I don't know. I don't like the idea of taking something that like a lot of people that play are like really passionate about and, use their own creativity to fuel this game and making it into like a Hollywood blockbuster that they can just monetize. I think having like D&D as like an episode, like an episodic type of thing, like Critical Role or like the Adventure Zone or Dimension 20 or all those types of like companies and shows, like that works because they're not trying to make it like the topic about D&D. Like they're literally just playing the game. Like they're just using the guidelines as they're kind of meant to be and making their own story. And that's why it's so like compelling, is because like it's not about D&D. It's not about all the D&D stereotype. It's literally just creating a story, and that's what D&D is supposed to be. You're just having an adventure with your friends, or you're making your own kind of Lord of the Rings or Holy Grail type of adventure. So I already had kind of like a bias coming into the movie, and but like I guess it could have been worse, but it definitely could have been better. Honestly, it would have been better if they just didn't make it at all. Because like I said before, I just don't agree with the practice of taking something that was already from like a niche, like a kind of like a more niche community, and then just trying to like monetize it, and it's just like very generic. And I was like, this isn't really what D&D is like about. I don't know. I just didn't really like it as much. But yeah, sorry, what was the score you were gonna give it?
Yeah, so my score for Dungeons and Dragons, it was a ride, maybe not the best ride. Like the music sounded, well, I mean, we didn't even touch upon the music that much, but it
I
felt,
forgot about it.
yeah, like it was kind of forgettable, but
Yeah, I mean, I think this podcast episode speaks for itself about the music, right? We didn't even
yeah,
we talk about it.
yeah, but when I went back and listened to the soundtrack after the fact, I thought to myself, it feels like they're just riffing off of Skyrim's soundtrack and Lord of the Rings music.
Yeah, there's like the generic like fantasy music.
Yeah, and it's like there's a way to do that where it feels like more of its own thing, but it feels
Hmm.
like it didn't really make its own identity, really.
Yeah. And it's a shame too, because like fantasy music, like you could literally do anything. Like I think a really great soundtrack, I think, is from like Pillars of Eternity. um like I haven't actually played the game, but I listened to like the soundtrack, and it slaps. It's very good. I actually use it like for my D&D sessions sometimes. So um yeah, it's just kind of like, oh, Baldur's Gate 3 also has a really, really good, and that's actually kind of like a D&D game, actually using the mechanics and everything. So but yeah, for the movie it was just kind of like, yeah, just like you said, kind of just generic fantasy, like Skyrim, Lord of the Rings type of thing. They definitely could have tried a bit harder, I think.
Yeah, and there was a minstrel at one point, but they were in the background and just barely audible. Like they didn't really take full advantage of that whole aesthetic, which is kind of disappointing. But yeah, so the movie, I feel like they could have done the whole thing better. Like it feels like they didn't really do enough to widen the scope of what a Dungeons and Dragons movie could be.
Yeah.
Like they showed like real world and the game world, which I mean that's a fine idea, but I feel like the settings and the encounters like just felt by the numbers, and like the
Hmm.
studio didn't want it to get weird enough, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't even use any of like the classic D&D monsters. Like there were no like beholders. There were no like, I guess even dragons are like, the stereotypical fantasy, but they didn't even use those. No mind flayers. They could have done
Yeah.
like something cool with that. Like there's so many like monsters that they could have done, and just like things they could have pulled from D&D, and they just kind of went with a generic fantasy route, which is also kind of the issue I have with like, them trying to turn D&D into like a movie. Like there's just so many avenues that you can take, and I don't think it's fair just to try to make a movie about just like D&D, because like it's not really, it's kind of backwards, like we said, like D&D kind of pulled from Lord of the Rings, so you could look at like retrospectively Lord of the Rings is kind of like a D&D campaign, right? Pretty much any story can be a D&D campaign, because D&D is literally just a mechanism for you to make to play through a story, so I kind of feel like making a D&D specific movie is kind of going backwards, and I think that was, now that I'm kind of thinking about that was kind of like that's kind of like my main kind of thought process, is that they're looking at it backwards, and just why? Just stop.
Yeah, and like there were barely any dragons in this. Like there were a couple of them at the prison, but not much screen time. Like I kind of wonder if maybe that was down to like CGI budget or something, or not
Hmm.
enough good puppetry or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to like the Fantastic Beasts problem, where it feels like the
Oh yeah.
movie's not even about the Fantastic Beasts anymore.
Hmm.
I mean, that's not to say that Dungeons and Dragons is just about the dragons, but it's just kind of
Yeah.
weird that they're in the title, but like not featured as much.
Hmm.
But all that is to say that I can see how they could have made this a lot better. And I know that they had like some good actors in this, but maybe they weren't utilized in the best way.
Yeah.
A Dungeons and Dragons movie, like I had high hopes for this one. Like I thought they learned from the previous ones, and I feel like they did to an extent.
Hmm.
Like it at least looks and feels better than the other ones, I think.
Hmm.
But overall, it just felt kind of like some of it felt really generic, and like the characters were just kind of there,
Yeah.
you know. Like it was just mainly spectacle, and that was it. So I guess I would give this one a 5.7 out of 10 gold pieces.
Hmm.
I guess that's it for that movie. Before we do final plugs, I actually got an email from my friend Oliver again.
Hmm.
This one came in. It was actually sent in before the previous episode, but I wasn't able to get to it. So, yeah, I'll just read it. Dear Delayed Replay Steven, I've just listened to the latest episode of Delayed Replay Star Wars Holiday Special 2. In the episode, you briefly mentioned the E.T. ripoff Mac and Me. You mentioned that there is a famous scene in it. I assumed that you were referring to the scene where all the characters do a spontaneous dance off inside and outside McDonald's. If you look very carefully, you can see a pre Friends Jennifer Aniston in the scene. You mentioned that McDonald's makes multiple appearances in the film. The reason for this is because the producers had a profit sharing deal with McDonald's, hence the large amount of product placement. I've never seen the film. The only reason I know all this is because the film is on the list of films considered the worst. Keep up the good work. I can't wait for the third season. Oliver Titcomb from that other universe where the films you reviewed got delayed. So yeah, I don't know if you've ever watched Mac and Me, Haley, but have you heard of it at least?
um I've heard of Marley and Me, right? That's a movie.
Oh, the dog.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard the Mac and Me one though.
Oh yeah, Mac and Me is basically like an ET ripoff.
Mm.
Um, yeah, but to answer Oliver's question, the scene I was talking about was the one where there's like one of the kids is in a wheelchair and like he ends up like falling into a lake or something, and it's something that like Paul Rudd likes playing to Conan O'Brien whenever he gets interviewed for like whatever reason. It's really weird. It's just like a running gag that he does when
Mm.
he's on Conan, I guess. As terrible as that movie is, I kind of want to watch it again just to like see, like remind myself like on a scale from 1 to 10, like how terrible is it type of thing.
Hmm.
I just remembered, like, so on the previous episode we were talking about the sideways looking monkey meme, right?
Yes. I get the Muppet.
Yeah, so I looked this up, and it's actually not from the Muppets.
It's not. Okay. What's
Yeah,
it from?
it's from a Japanese children's show called,
Oh,
yeah, it's called Okiku Naru Ko, which translates to growing children.
huh. Interesting.
Yeah,
You
aired
learn
from,
something new every day.
yeah, apparently aired from 59 to 88. But
Hmm.
yeah, thanks for the email, Oliver. Hope that all clears things up, I guess. But yeah, I guess we'll wrap things up now. Thanks for joining me again, Haley. Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, happy to be on here and just, I guess, be angry all the time because because most of the time I'm on here, I just rant about stuff, and then you're just like, "Yep, okay." But yeah, you can find me at Dancing Dinos Delirium on Instagram. That's dancing with a. I sometimes I forget my own handle because I just made it like ridiculous for some reason, but that's dancing with like an underscore dinos dot delirium, and I do cosplay and everything. So if you're interested, you can find me there. But yeah, happy to be on this episode, and yeah, always happy to talk about D&D and rant about bad D&D movies.
Yeah, and I mean, you've had D&D inspired cosplays, right?
I have gone as Jester from the second campaign of Critical Role, and I'm
Right.
actually currently making a Fern Calloway cosplay from campaign 3. I haven't cosplayed any of my D&D characters, but I have been thinking about it. It's just a matter of all the designs I make for my characters are just very complicated. So I don't know if I'd want to just like cry over a bunch of fabric in the future. But who knows, maybe one day. But yeah, I do have like, yeah, Jester and Fern are, technically D&D related.
Yeah, and I mean, Critical Role is something I've heard nothing but good things about, but when I
Mhm.
tried listening to it, I would like zone out. So like,
Yeah, I have
unfortunately,
to
I'm
I
not
have to
able to get
actually,
into it.
yeah, that's understandable. I actually have to like physically watch it. Otherwise my attention drifts off too. That's just how I am.
Do you
I
ever have
mean,
to play
mhm.
at like double the speed?
No, I never played a double the speed. But yeah, I don't watch it live because I don't have time, and also I just like I can't sit still for like that long. So I just like, usually they release it on like Mondays on YouTube.
Yeah, there's like so much of it.
Yeah. It is really funny when you see like memes where it's like it compares something like One Piece, right? That has like thousands of episode, and then everyone's like, oh, that has like, critters like that. Oh, that takes too much time. That's too many episodes. And you compare it to like the hours that Critical Role has, and it's like One Piece becomes like very small in comparison, and you're just like, oh well,
Yeah,
we don't
it
talk about that.
becomes it becomes 0.01 piece.
Wow. No.
Oh, sorry.
I'll never forgive you. I say in my very, deadpan voice. But yeah, no, D&D is fun. And yeah, to all our listeners, if you haven't tried it and you're considering trying it, try it and see if you like. And just remember that if you play with strangers and you don't like them, it might not be the game, it might just be the people, because sometimes people make a very, very big difference when you play D&D. If you have friends, that's the best way to go.
Right. Or maybe they might suck just like I do. And maybe they're the no, I'm kidding.
You're the problem.
But yeah, maybe D&D will be for you listeners. I'm sure like at least one person who listens plays D&D, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
if
But
we can get one person to convert, that
yeah, and
just
they
kidding.
tell two friends and they tell two friends, and that's
Yeah,
like 1,000 people right there.
yeah, like it's definitely like, it is true from the 80s. It is a devil worshiping community. So we're trying to collect as many people as we can, join the cult. So, spread the word.
Yeah. Just knocks on the door, opens a player's handbook.
Yeah. Would you be interested in listening to our Holy Father Gary Gygax?
Yeah, but no, it's not bad. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks again. And as for my plugs, people can find me at Steven Shinder on Instagram and Twitter, Steven Shinder Storytelling on Facebook, stevenshinder.com for info on my novel Lemons Will Make Rain, and still making progress on the next book, so keep an eye out for more info to come. And you can email this podcast at delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com. Let us know your thoughts on games, I guess. And you can also listen to me and my dad on our podcast Yes Shift, where we talk about the progressive rock band Yes. Lots of news and topics and just all around fun music discussion. It's great. Give us a listen if that's your thing. And yeah, the next episode will probably be on The Bad Guys, that DreamWorks movie based on a book series. Yeah, thanks for listening, and without further delay, have a good day. I didn't say this when we recorded the episode, but happy D&Dcember.